You watched Mr. Powell's comments yesterday, and you thought what?
I did. Well, I wouldn't say I was surprised. I think that he said what I expected him to say. I can see why the market is a little bit disappointed. And the reason is this. You know, when the Fed talks about data dependence, the issue is really which data. There are so many data series that one can look at. And the question is, what's the most relevant in terms of predicting where the economy is going? You know, I've said this before on your show, but to my mind, the most important indicator of where we're going to be in the future is what the market is telling you. The market is forward-looking. Most of the numbers that we get in terms of government statistics are backward-looking. So when you see the S&P fall by the amount that it has fallen over the past 3 months, that's a pretty strong indication that things are turning in a negative direction, at least with respect to growth. So, you know, the chairman said something like 2.3%. That was kind of the median estimate of where they thought we would be next year. The market certainly doesn't think that. If you use the market numbers, we're nowhere near that.
The question I have is Jay Powell mistaken about where the economy is going, or is the market mistaken about the way Jay Powell is thinking about all this? Was his comment about two hikes too definitive, or if he separately said he's going to be data dependent, so maybe he doesn't do it?
Well, I guess the way I think about it is this. You remember, you know, I kind of had a job like that when I was in the White House. My job was head of what we call Troika. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but Troika consists of the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, the Treasury Secretary, and the head of Office of Management and Budget. And our job was to forecast the economy. And we had really good forecasters, but, you know, it's a pretty tough thing to do. So when I got out and started looking at the data, again, what I found was that our internal forecasts were not generally as good as the market forecasts. So, you know, I think it was Joe mentioned just about 5 minutes ago, you know, the market's saying this, but the Fed thinks this. Again, if I have to bet on one or the other, I'm going to bet on the data coming from the market and not the internal stuff.
Dr. Copper,
3-month low.
Yeah.
Ed, are you saying that the Fed should, in fact, listen to the markets more?
Yeah, I would say that they should listen to the market more, but not because they're trying to manipulate the market. You have to be a little bit careful there. You know, there are a lot of people who advocate that the Fed should be bursting bubbles when they see them. That's a tough game to play.
That's what they did during the Obama years. That's what they were manipulating the market during the Obama years, higher with the zero interest rate.
I think that's the wrong strategy. Again, you want to look at the market because the market tells you a lot. It gives you a lot of information about the future. The yield curves give you information about the future. You guys mentioned just before the break, I think you talked about the flattening of the yield curve. That's not a new phenomenon, although it's become more pronounced. There are a couple of reasons why that happens. One is that the future is bleak. You know, you're looking at long rates and they're falling. The other is that the current situation is one where there's reduced liquidity and current rates are going up. We've seen a combination of both over the past couple of months, but the primary factor has been that the short end has gone up. So to me, again, that's Fed-driven. What we're seeing is a contraction in liquidity. And if I'm looking at the future, if I'm looking at the next year or so, I think I would be in a situation where I wouldn't be saying 2, I'd probably be saying 0 or 1.
You know, on the balance sheet issue, Ed, that's something that the markets have really honed in on recently. And Steve Leisman says, you know, put it into context. If your basement, I'm going to mangle this metaphor, but if your basement were flooded and you had 3 feet of water and then, you know, you were able to pump out some water and you've got 1 foot of water, you'd still say you got plenty of liquidity there. What's your take on this? Because it does seem like the market's very concerned about this aspect of tightening.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd use Steve's metaphor, but I guess I kind of agree with him. And the reason is this. If we look back at the history of QE as opposed to the more recent QT, you know, I think most people felt, even critics of the Fed, my colleagues at Stanford, John Taylor, people who are very knowledgeable about this stuff, most people felt that QE1 was probably a good thing, QE2 less effective, QE3 even less effective. And that's in the nature of the beast. I mean, you always use those tools that are most effective first, and then you use the things that are less effective as you move into the subsequent parts of the cycle. So going backward in the other direction, the same thing is true. You're going to reduce those things that are going to harm you the least. And so I guess I'm not as concerned about the balance sheet unwinding as I would be about really the direct play on the interest rates right now.
Ed, what do you think the chances are that Jay Powell made the comments he did and was as strident as he was as a function of a response to the political pressure that has been applied to him?
Well, you know, that's a tough question. I'm not a great psychologist, so I won't give you a strong opinion on that. What I will say, though, is the Fed is always in a situation like this where, irrespective of the president's comments, they have to balance monetary policy against fiscal policy. So during the Obama years, we didn't have a particularly pro-growth fiscal policy situation. And probably now it's the reverse. You know, I was thinking back and you know, when I'm talking with Rick, Rick and I are often saying, gee, you know, they should have gotten going a little bit earlier. Well, that's easy to say in hindsight. I think it's true. But, you know, Janet was sitting there with a situation where we didn't have an expansive fiscal policy, and they had to counteract that with monetary policy. I think right now, Chairman Powell may be thinking slightly the reverse, but not so much because of the reaction to the president's personal comments or chiding on whether he was the right chair or anything like that. My guess is the chairman is
certainly the China
above
stuff
that,
is all Trump. If you're not going to blame
that.
Trump for this, Ed, I mean, certainly the China stuff is his fault. I mean, there must be something. I mean, right? I mean, we got to. I mean, this is his fault somehow or another. We're going to get there. China, we got to get there one way or another. So I'm just trying to help here.
Yeah, I'm not an advocate. I'm not an advocate of either the president lobbying the Fed or of the anti-trade policies. So in that sense, I'm with you.
Thank you.
But
okay, good.
The question was, the question was whether Powell was reacting to that. My guess is not.
He
so
says
much.
no, but I still think that there is, you know, that staying the course. I'm Paul Volcker. I do the hard things. I still think, and you've seen that in the past.
Sure.
They don't change very quickly because they feel like. It's weird that I think they feel like they want to be confident in their models, or else they shouldn't do the models. And by being confident in the models, even when the evidence is flying right in the face of their models, they still stick with them, which is probably not great.
Well, that's right. I mean, the Fed is by its nature a reactive agency.
Right.
You know, when you say you're looking at the data and then you're going to respond to it, you have to react. So you have to wait for the data to come in.